Jy luister na Isak Du Plessis op Nuuspod.
Oor min of meer 2 maande hou die DA sy eerste aanlyn federale kongres waar die nuwe leier van die party verkies sal word. 3 kandidate is tans in 'n stryd gewikkel vir die posisie. Dis die tussentydse leier John Steenhuisen, die party se leier in Gauteng John Moodie en die jong Mbali Ntuli van KwaZulu-Natal. Ntuli is vir baie mense relatief onbekend. Die feit en haar jeugdigheid maak dat haar ambisie maklik deur meer senior lede van die party afgemaak word. Maar in die paar maande sedert die begin van haar veldtog om leier te word, het sy tog die aandag van politieke kommentators getrek wat sê sy is 'n vars bries in die party. Nuuspod het besluit om haarself te vra wie Mbali Ntuli is.
It's a difficult question to answer, but I think in a nutshell, Mbali Ntuli is somebody who hails from KZN. I've been in the Democratic Alliance for the last 14 years. I started off creating its branches at university levels where it didn't exist before, creating data branches at Rhodes where I attended. I came back, and despite having a job in an investment firm, I was still so passionate about politics and wanted to make a difference that I was an activist for the DA, and I created its first branches in townships in Inanda and Duzuma and Guamashu. Eventually, I would go on to become a councillor in the city of eThekwini. And now I have been a 2-term member of the provincial legislature, and I've served on education, social development, public participation and petitions, and I now currently serve in cooperative governance and traditional leadership. And I think professionally, it's been a very interesting journey for me, just because politics is so interesting in South Africa, it's so dynamic, it moves so fast. And certainly when I started 14 years ago, there weren't many Black people who were part of the DA and who, sort of identified as liberals. And so there was a lot of flack that I got for many years from the outside. And internally, it also wasn't easy because you were this young person that people thought was an upstart, and you had to really try and prove yourself, which is part of, I suppose, any organizational growth. But you have to be incredibly thick-skinned, I think, in the political space in South Africa and really know what you're about and why you want to do things. And I think it's been what's really helped me to survive as long as I have. And also, I suppose, because I'm a little bit different in that whilst I take my work seriously, I don't take myself that seriously. So I've never succumbed to the idea of being enamored with the positions per se. And I've been the National Youth Chair and the National Youth Leader of the DA. I've started branches for the DA in places like Mkanyagute, which border on to Mozambique, which are incredibly rural and where the DA had never existed before. And I'm very happy that those places have grown phenomenally. And when I was there, we were able to manage to get seats and councillors in every single one of the municipalities in that district, which was historic and a first for the DA. And it's a big belief of mine that what you really need to do if you want to gain the trust of communities is to be there, to have permanent presence, to make sure that they actually see you not just before the elections, but that you are with them and you are trying your best to service them. And that's the only way that you eventually are able to get people to trust you. And for me, I see people who understand that the DA governs well where it does, but still don't fundamentally trust it. And it's one of the reasons that I'm running, because I want the party to get away from the idea of thinking that if they just throw facts at voters and tell voters how bad the ANC is or how amazing the DA is doing, that doesn't move people. What moves people is a little bit of that, but also a lot of the feeling that you engender in them and the fact that they can trust you and the relatability of your leaders. And so in many ways, I'm probably not the typical type of politician who should be running for this position, but in many ways, I think we're all tired of the typical types of politicians, and we want a new change, and we want to believe that somebody who is left of center or, weird and quirky and not the typical type of person who would run for this can run and can potentially win. And so that's really been a big part of my campaign platform. along with the fact that I want everyone to feel welcome, everyone to feel included. And that's because as the type of person I am throughout my whole life, I've always been an outsider. So I know what that feels like, and I know how important it is to have a leader that can make people feel that they have a voice. And simply saying that we are a diverse party doesn't mean that everybody is included. And so that's a big part of why I'm running. So Mbali she's a mixture of a lot of different things, but I think in many ways I'm also typical of the South Africans my age, in that I still have much of my family, much of my extended family still in rural areas and townships. And so I see poverty and the desperation of what the legacy of apartheid has done to those people. But I've also been privileged and lucky enough to have had the opportunities to grow up in multiracial schooling and friendship groups, and so can understand how much hope and how much positivity there is for us going forward if we can embrace the things that we need to fix urgently.
Bly ingeskakel, ons praat net na die advertensie verder.
Verkeersboetes behels meer as 'n klein ongerief met minimale gevolge. Jy kan 'n kriminele rekord kry of probleme teekom as jy jou rybewys of motorlisensie hernie, en die metropolisie kan jou by padblokkades lastigval om die boetes te betaal. Fines for You verminder moeite met verkeersboetes deur hul te monitor en vinnig, wetlik en effektief af te handel, sodat jy nie die ongewenste gevolge hoef te dra nie. Ons spesialiseer in groot vlote en streef daarna om jou geld te bespaar. Kontak ons gerus op 011 867 7331 of besoek ons webtuiste by www.finesforyou.co.za.
Jy luister na Isak Du Plessis op Nuuspod.
The diversity of who Mbali Ntuli is struck me when I did some reading on you, and you made a couple of points now that I want to touch further. But the one thing that struck me is Mbali Ntuli, who's with the Liberal Party, who's got liberal views, but also values the tradition. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, my family on both sides is strongly Zulu, and my mom and dad took great pride in the traditions and customs that they had grown up with, and they made sure to instill them in my brother and I, particularly I think for them because we had moved to suburbia and lived in, this fancy suburb of Durban North. And I think their great worry was that we would lose connection with our roots if they didn't make it a very important part of us understanding where we came from. And so we would do traditional ceremonies here in Durban. We still go back to our homesteads in Mapumulo and Nkandla, which is where my mom and dad are from respectfully. And we did all the chores that come with being in rural areas, which means, we carry the water to the river or from the river. We would use the dung to try and polish the floors at my grandmother's house, all of the kinds of stuff that come with rural areas. And of course, also making sure that we had enough of township experience by visiting cousins and extended families there, because it was very important to them for us to not accept that Western culture would be the homogenous way that we had an outlook of life. And I'm so incredibly grateful to my parents for that. And even things like scarification, the idea of using traditional medicines for some things are still things that I do today. And I'm going to be raising my daughter in that way too. And if anything, I think it's such a beautiful part of what I bring into the political realm, because I understand the idea of negotiating shared values. And so there are definitely parts of African traditions that I reject wholeheartedly as somebody who believes in individual rights and the sanctity of people's bodily integrity. So when it comes to things like virginity testing, I personally have major problems with it. But because I've been in communities and because I've grown around people who really take it to be a sign of honor and sign of they're respecting their parents and the way that they have been raised in their homes, I don't impose my own views on those people. And I think that that's the very interesting thing about South Africa, is we almost have these parallel worlds and we're still trying to figure out, well, where do we stand? What is acceptable to us? What isn't? And for me in my political career, it's been very helpful that I've had the enormous amount of diverse communities to be a part of, because it's helped me to be able to reach across, I think, to many different people and to understand really where they're from. And so, I mean, I'm not a religious person, but I certainly speak to my ancestors and I certainly observe ancestral traditions and rites during ceremonies and when it's necessary.
I'll tell you one thing. You should have been in Parliament today. Jacob Zuma mocked the opposition about their pronunciation on Nkandla. I was just listening when you said it, and now I understand why he was mocking.
Nkandla. Jacob Zuma was very funny.
Mbali, the other point that you made in your introduction is the DA's lack of reaching rural areas. It doesn't seem that the DA does the footwork the other parties like the EFF does. Do you think that your understanding of tradition and the value you have for liberalism will help you get a better standing in the party in terms of plans for more support in the future?
I certainly hope it will, if people in the party are hoping that we go in a direction of growth. There is no more growth left for us as the Democratic Alliance in suburban areas. We have truly maxed out what we can get from the very suburban areas. And I think with the changing demographics, even in suburbia, there are many communities where you can't specifically say who lives where anymore. I mean, you could take a place like Sandton, and predominantly that would have been, I think, in the past, one of the safest areas in terms of electoral votes for the DA. But that isn't the case anymore. Sandton has become a melting pot of different cultural, ethnic, racial groupings. And as a party, we just cannot afford to be constantly pandering to one type of voter more predominantly than the other. And for me, if we want to remain relevant, we're going to have to go do the hard work of being not just in rural areas, but also township areas, because one, that's just in terms of numbers where the majority of people are. Two, it's where the ANC is strongest. And if we want to be able to get the ANC below 50%, we have to go and be where they are. And then thirdly, we have to really be there all the time and help these communities and get people who are already community leaders there to be the people that stand for the party, because then at least people will trust them to be able to deliver for them and create permanent presence where people can start trusting us. If we can't do that, then I'm afraid that we aren't going to go forward. And if the EFF can arrive in 2014 and take 6% of the vote and then get 11% in 2019, it concerns me that we allow so much leeway for other parties to really campaign in places where we are not doing much campaigning or as much as we should be. And I think people always assume that the ANC has this great hold on people. They do not. And I mean, I'm from KZN, where we've seen the ANC and the IFP in power. We have multiple municipalities that are run by different parties. So there definitely is scope for people who want to have an alternative, but you actually have to be there for them to be able to choose you. And then you need to make sure that it's people that are from those communities. So when the party, for example, sent me, somebody who lives in Durban, to Mkhanyakude, which is 6 hours away from my home, I did the best I could. But imagine how much more somebody who'd actually been from those communities could have done, because they could have been there so much more. And that's what we need to. We need to go and grow our own timber of people that are in those communities and empower them to be able to stand their ground and stand for their communities. And only then are we going to kind of see the returns that we're expecting. Because right now, the strategy of hoping that people are just going to suddenly believe that the DA is better than the ANC is not going to happen. And I'm a pragmatist in that sense. And I think we're wasting time.
Bly ingeskakel, ons praat net na die advertensie verder.
Wil jy seker maak dat jou boedelbeplanning, eiendomstransaksie of ander regswerk deur professionele kundiges hanteer word? Hurterspies-prokureurs beskik oor uitstekende kundigheid wat die opstel van testamente en die hantering van boedels betref. Hurterspies-prokureurs het ook bekendheid verwerf vir hulle sukses met litigasie oor jou burgerregte. Kliënte se unieke behoeftes word deeglik deur kundiges op elke terrein hanteer. Skakel Hurterspies-prokureurs vandag nog vir 'n konsultasie by 012-941-9239 of stuur 'n e-pos aan admin@hurterspies.co.za. Dis 012-941-9239.
Jy luister na Isak Du Plessis op Nuuspod.
Can the current leadership of the DA reach what you have set out just now?
I don't think so, and that's why I'm running. If I thought that they were capable of doing that, then I would have let them continue. And I say that with the greatest respect. I think that they are good in their own ways and reaching other communities and, doing other roles in the party. But I really think that you're going to need somebody who innately believes in this strategy and who is going to actually go there and speak to these communities. And I feel that the leadership that we currently have is maintaining the status quo of what we've always been doing. And I think we've had a year with this current leadership, and I haven't seen any difference in terms of our strategy. I still think we're speaking to the same people about the same issues. And for example, even when I presented my manifesto, I said, and this was in February already, I said that if the DA wanted to be more relevant in different communities, we also had to start to speak in a way that people understand. Right now, we are very filled with jargon, it's very highbrow, and it's not relatable to the ordinary person. So when we speak about, let's say, the economy, we can't speak and say things like, we want to have a free market economy that's open, blah, blah, blah. That might be what you want, but nobody on the ground understands that. Nobody who hasn't got a basic grasp of just basic economics is going to hear what you're saying. So you've already lost half that audience. If I'm on a Khosi FM speaking to that, even though people are incredibly politicized and they understand politics, they're not going to hear your message. So I said that we need to segment the economy and speak to different people. So for example, in my manifesto, I speak about how we can help to formalize the informal economy and to help those people be able to get access to money, opportunities to grow their businesses. And lo and behold, COVID-19 showed us what a huge part of the economy that is, how much money was lost from that, and how many people depend on it. And I think if the party can start looking at how they speak to specific markets, we would be able to sort this. When it comes to land, I don't like the approach of speaking about it holistically or just about Section 25. I think you have to segment it. The people in Cape Town who have had apartheid spatial planning affect their lives and affect their histories is incredibly different to the people of KZN that live under Ingonyama Trust land and have izindunas. And we have to speak to different people in a way that is relatable to them. And so that's how I've tried to break up the kind of offer that I have. And that's what I think the DA needs to be going forward, because only certain things are relevant to certain people. And not everybody cares, for example, about apartheid spatial planning if they are living where their ancestors have always lived. What they care about is that it's not going to be taken away from them and that they'll always have some spiritual connection to the land. And so there are so many complexities in South Africa, and I think the DA does itself a disservice sometimes by speaking very generically and very highbrow, because then we lose a lot of the audiences that we could be really connecting with.
Let's move to the current support base of the DA, and by that I mean the bigger part that we were talking about earlier, the suburbians, which is currently, a lot of them are Afrikaans, and even sometimes a little bit conservative to more leftist, if you can make a generalization about that. The point is, if someone in that part of the support base of the DA hears that Mbali Ntuli is not religious and that she has some traditional values, their hair will stand up. How to treat them now, if you want to reach a broad base of support?
I think you have to treat people like human beings. And I think people are smart enough to understand that we aren't all going to be the same in every aspect. But authenticity and trustworthiness and whether you can get the job done at the end of the day is what I think all voters want to see, whether they're conservative or not. And I mean, I think we have many conservative voters in South Africa, not just Afrikaans, but Zulu, of all ethnic and cultural backgrounds. And I think what you always have to do is be honest and very upfront about who you are so that people at least have a choice to decide whether they want to give you an opportunity or not. I don't think that anyone's going to be scared off by me. If anything, I think that people would be refreshed to hear somebody speaking quite frankly on that. And I haven't seen any data that says that Afrikaans people in suburbia are not also pragmatic people who understand that if the DA needs to grow, it's going to have somebody who can actually appeal to a far wider market than it's been appealing to now. And I think people's pragmatism often outweighs whatever sort of personal prejudices they might have about one or two things around a person. And what I trust fundamentally is that people everywhere will always do what's best for them. And if voters of the DA who might be in suburbia, who might be a bit more conservative, believe that I can get more votes for the party and I can actually try and help to get the ANC below 50%, I think that they'd be willing to overlook the fact that I'm not terribly religious or that I'm not particularly interested in marriage, but that I'm going to get the job done and I'm going to get the votes in.
You are going about your what is the word in English now? Sometimes
My campaign?
But your campaign, yes, that is the word. You are going about your campaign in ways that politicians in South Africa are not really used to. What makes you different, and how did you decide on this is the way that I'm going to do my campaign?
Well, I suppose it's just the way that I am. I've always wanted to do things in a way that really tries to break the sound barrier, and in ways that are going to excite people. Because as I said, I think at the beginning of the podcast, as a young person, I'm incredibly bored by the staleness of our political discourse in this country. I'm bored by the same characters being in different roles in this film. And for me, really to be able to compete with somebody who's been the leader already for a year, who has the party machinery behind them, who has more platforms to discuss what his vision is, it was always going to have to be the strategy that everything that I did had to be on as big a platform as him in order to compete, and for people to understand that I'm completely serious about what I'm trying to say. I'm very serious about the direction that both the DA and the country have to take, and that if we don't do that now, people like myself, particularly who are still young, are going to be bearing the brunt of whatever happens next for the next 30 or somewhat years. And so I suppose there's a bit of an urgency and a bit of a do or die attitude to the way that I am, because for me, it's really a referendum here on where the DA goes forward. And so I don't want to have done it half-heartedly and have regrets that maybe if I'd gone a bit bolder that people could have voted for me. I'm going to give it all I have, and if, people agree, then that's great. If they don't, that's also fine. But it also means then that we have to be, I think, bracing ourselves for a very different looking electoral outcome next year than one we would have expected. And that scares me.
A classical liberalist can be as staunch as any conservative man or woman that I know. How do the people in the DA receive your participation in the race for leader?
Well, so far it's been incredibly encouraging. I mean, just in the last 2 days, I've had some really great endorsements from leaders in Gauteng. I've had great endorsements from people in KZN. I'm getting great feedback from the Northwest and the Free State. The province that's proving a little bit difficult is the Western Cape at the moment, but I'm going to be working very hard to convince some of them too. But I found that by and large, people have been excited and I think are very interested in the race. Obviously, there's also some people who are staunchly backing other candidates that are probably being a little bit more brutal than they should be, but I'm quite thick-skinned, so I'm not taking it too personally. I understand that for some people, this literally is, their bread and butter, and so they feel very aggrieved by somebody who is challenging what they believe to be perfectly normal and perfectly status quo things. Just last week, I did a conversation on climate change and the ecological crisis that we face in South Africa. And as I was speaking to one of these experts and saying that this is what I wanted the party to do, which is not just to produce policy, but to explain policy to voters and to take the voters along with us and make them understand how this affects their ordinary lives. I got some backlash from people in the party who felt that they had been doing great work on that particular point. But the point is nobody knows what they've been doing because we act in silos. So there definitely has been some brutal moments during the campaign, and some of it has been quite hurtful. And I think you put yourself in a very vulnerable position when you try to run for something of this nature. But I'm trying to soldier on, and it's a part of my own personal growth as well.
Let's look into the future. Mbali Ntuli have won the leadership contest. She's now the leader of the DA in 2025. What do you see?
2025?
No. You have won it, but it's now 5 years onwards. You have been the leader for the past 5 years.
Yes. I see a DA that has got a robust internal culture that is strong and vibrant about debating issues openly and stridently, but with great respect. I see a DA that no longer has people who fear coercion and intimidation for positions and power, but rather is more collaborative in nature. And importantly, I see a DA that values and appreciates its internal members a lot more and looks out for their well-being, both physically and emotionally, because right now I think we suffer from a lot of burnout because we just don't have that kind of ability to take wellness into consideration. And then for South Africa, I hopefully see a DA that has helped to realign politics, certainly at a municipal level, at the first bite with various partners, a DA that's honored its word and has negotiated in good faith with our coalition partners, and hopefully a DA that has been able to bring the ANC below 50%. And is looking at starting to change the country and get the economy working, most importantly, but also the conversations on proper social inclusion and cohesion going in a far more honest manner than we've seen before.
Dit was Mbali Ntuli van die DA. Ek is Isak du Plessis.
Een van ons groot projekte, monumentaal, sê jy sit ons terugkyk in 'n geloof vorentoe bou. Ons nooi jou uit om deel te word van ons familie. Bou saam met ons. Ons besef mense is verskillend in hulle sentiment lê op verskillende plekke. Sommige wil gee vir hulle wat honger is en ander vir hulle wat bejaard of gestremd is. Sommige wil spesifiek vroue bemagtig. Ander wil jong meisies bystaan en ander wil studente ondersteun, terwyl nog ander vra vir die opheffing van hulle gemeenskappe. Daar is soveel plek waar 'n mens jou R50 wil spandeer. Vertrou ons by Helpende Hand om dit namens jou aan te wend, waar ons maatskaplike werkers vir ons aandui, waar ons die nood identifiseer en waar ons rekenskap van jou bydrae kan gee. Word vandag nog deel van die Helpende Hand familie. SMS die woord familie na 45763 en ons skakel jou terug om seker te maak dat jy deel word van hierdie familie. Familie na 45763. Ons het 'n verskil gemaak die afgelope paar maande en ons wil voortgaan daarmee. Ons sal die pad vorentoe tree vir tree vat. Help jy ons om ons gemeenskappe te versterk en saam bou ons gemeenskappe. Saam gaan ons vorentoe, in hart, met krag, tot hoop. Familie na 45763 en word deel van die Solidariteit Helpende Hand se omgee.